Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into Module 26, Chapter 1, which zeroes in on a wildly misunderstood area of environmental management. We're talking about Annex A.7. Now, we're going to look at how to evaluate organizational competence, awareness, structured communication, and documented information control, really detailing how these support mechanisms transform basic administrative checkboxes into the actual operational heartbeat of a functioning EMS. If you're prepping for an ISO 1401-2026 lead auditor assessment, or honestly, if you just want to build a system that actually works, you are absolutely in the right place.
So it's kind of this fascinating puzzle, right? Why do systems that have the absolute best operational tech, the most advanced emission controls, and just massive budgets, why do they still fail? Well, lead auditors see this all the time. The answer almost never points to the machinery itself. Instead, it points right at weak organizational support. It's the human element. The internal infrastructure is just failing to hold the whole system up. So let's look at how we can actually evaluate and fix this.
To solve this puzzle, we have to look directly to Annex A.7. This is the interpretive guidance that completely redefines four core elements: competence, awareness, communication, and documented information. It basically tells auditors and organizations that, hey, these aren't just isolated administrative tasks. Actually, they form a deeply interconnected support system, one that's designed to sustain your EMS through all sorts of organizational changes and operational challenges.
Here is our agenda for today. First, beyond the checkbox. Second, competence versus qualifications. Third, the power of awareness. Fourth, structured communication. Fifth, proportional documentation. And finally, number 6, the integrated support system.
Starting with Part 1, beyond the checkbox. Support mechanisms are not just administrative paperwork. Right off the bat, there's a massive difference between superficial compliance and genuine capability when we're evaluating these systems. Superficial compliance? That's basically treating support mechanisms as a static filing exercise. You know, just checking boxes, writing up generic procedures that live in some dusty binder. Genuine Annex A7 capability, on the other hand, is what a lead auditor is actually hunting for. They're evaluating whether support is embedded right into the daily operational behavior. It's really about building a system that adapts to change and preserves that critical environmental knowledge, which completely shifts the responsibility directly into the company culture.
Moving on to Part 2, competence versus qualifications, recognizing deviations, not just holding certificates.
Okay, so there is a very common trap when evaluating competence. Listen, having a nicely framed technical certificate on the wall, that doesn't actually mean someone is competent under Annex A7. Superficial compliance says, hey, I know how to operate this machine. But when we evaluate for true Annex A7 competence, we're looking for an employee's ability to interpret environmental data and actively spot deteriorating performance. It is literally the capability to identify a deviation and initiate corrective action way before a major incident even happens.
Let's make this concrete. Take a wastewater machine operator. A lead auditor expects them to do a lot more than just, push the right buttons. Sure, they need to operate the machinery safely, but they also absolutely must understand the specific environmental discharge thresholds. They have to know the ecological and regulatory consequences if they exceed those limits, and they need to know exactly how to promptly report any irregularities. Honestly, that is what true competence looks like in the real world.
Let's look at Part 3, the power of awareness, understanding the why behind environmental controls.
Evaluating awareness requires a totally different mindset. Superficial compliance is just passing around a sign-in sheet at a mandatory, incredibly boring policy presentation. Let's be real, that tells an auditor absolutely nothing. True capability shines when an employee understands the real-world environmental consequences of their everyday decisions. It's not about memorizing some policy statement word for word. It's about realizing how skipping a maintenance step or maybe delaying an equipment calibration directly impacts the broader ecosystem.
Think about a logistics driver. Under Annex A.7, an auditor evaluating awareness isn't just going to ask, did you read the environmental manual? No way. They want to discover if the driver's awareness actively covers specific operational behaviors. Like, do they understand the impact of engine idling time on emissions? Do they grasp the importance of route optimization and how their fuel efficiency directly impacts the company's big-picture environmental objectives? Hitting this level of awareness transforms employees from passive workers into highly proactive environmental stewards.
Next up, Part 4, structured communication channels, feedback loops that support risk management.
Think about your own workplace for a second.
Is your environmental communication just a faded policy tacked up on a break room bulletin board? Because if it is, that's completely superficial. True Annex A.7 capability demands a dynamic flow of information. Communication has to ensure that critical, highly accurate info reaches the exact right people exactly when they need it. This is what enables rapid decision-making and total transparency with your stakeholders.
When lead auditors evaluate communication, they are meticulously checking for very specific evidence points. They want to see cross-functional coordination. Basically, is the maintenance team actually talking to procurement about environmental specs? Are there crystal-clear reporting channels for external subcontractors so they actually understand your site rules? Are you being transparent with regulators in a timely way? And crucially, do you have post-incident feedback loops? Because your communication channels absolutely must actively support continuous organizational learning.
Now for Part 5, Proportional Documented Information, ensuring relevance, not just volume.
You know that massive, heavy procedure manual sitting on the shelf? Yeah, that's actually a giant red flag for an auditor evaluating your system, especially if it's outdated or just completely ignored by the staff. Excessive minders equal superficial compliance. What auditors actually love seeing for Annex A.7 capability is proportional, highly accessible information. We're talking about info integrated directly into digital tools or real-time dashboards. The whole point of documentation is to preserve vital knowledge, not to suffocate your team in administrative red tape.
So you're probably wondering, well, how much documentation is actually enough? The exact sufficiency of your documented information totally depends on a few key contextual factors. Obviously, a massive multinational chemical plant with severe risk exposure needs vastly different, much more rigorous controls than a small, low-risk service provider. The standard is purposefully flexible here. It expects you to tailor your documentation directly to your organizational size, your specific risk exposure, the competence of your current personnel, and how much you rely on digital monitoring systems.
Finally, Part 6, the Integrated Support System, how the 4 pillars rely on each other.
Let's look at this whole thing through the auditor's lens, specifically where these 4 pillars intersect. Imagine you have the smartest, most highly competent engineers in the industry, but zero structured communication. Well, that knowledge just stays isolated and is never shared across departments. Or what if you have the most perfect documented information, but absolutely zero active awareness? Those beautifully crafted procedures are just going to be completely ignored by the staff on the floor. And if your team has clear awareness but lacks proportional documents, you're going to end up with wildly inconsistent responses during an actual emergency. Basically, the entire system completely breaks down if these support mechanisms don't lock together.
This specific quote from a lead auditor really nails the core lesson. Human capability and discipline processes absolutely must work hand in hand. High confidence means nothing if communication channels fail to distribute that knowledge. It's a powerful realization that we cannot just rely on isolated brilliance. We have to build a solid infrastructure that shares knowledge, consistently updates procedures, and keeps every single person aligned to prevent those frustrating, recurring nonconformities.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to take back to your own organization. As you evaluate your competence, awareness, communication, and documentation, ask yourself this: does your support system actually support your operational goals, or does it just document them for the sake of passing an audit? I think it's time to transform that paperwork into a living, breathing environmental backbone. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this helps you build a much more resilient and highly effective management system.